Hello, and thank you for attending Kentik's second virtual panel on how leading companies support remote work and digital experience. Before we dive into today's presentation, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. If you have a question at any point during this event, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your Zoom window. We will address your questions throughout the conversation and at the end of the presentation. Also, the recorded version of today's presentation will be available following the event. Please look for an email from the Kentik team to rewatch and share the presentation. Now, I'd like to introduce you to today's moderator, Avi Friedman, co-founder and CEO of Kentik.
Hi, I'm Avi Friedman. As Michelle said, I'm co-founder and CEO of Kentik. We're a network analytics company. We work with and are friends with lots of folks that make the infrastructure and all the services that go on top of them. And we've seen a lot of interest over the last months in how the infrastructure and the services that people are really using to stay connected are functioning. So my friends and colleagues have agreed to join on a panel where we'll talk through some of these things, how things are scaling, whether the world of business continuity is like what we thought it is, how the network is scaling, how we're helping our teams work, and how we're helping our customers. So I'll ask everybody to do a quick intro on you and your company, starting with Christian.
Hi, my name is Christian Kaufmann. I'm heading the Network Technologies department at Akamai. Well, I kind of hope that everybody knows who Akamai is. We are one of the CDNs and content and software download companies, and we by now also have a significant security portfolio.
Igor?
Hi, I'm Igor Gashinsky. I'm the Chief Network Architect for Verizon Media, which was a portfolio of Yahoo Media properties, AOL, Edgecast, CDN, VDMS. So, hi, and thanks for having us.
And you represent CompuServe as well, right?
I have seen the single rack of CompuServe from back those days. It was quite impressive.
Awesome. And Jason?
Hi, Jason Black, representing Uber Technologies. I am the head of global network infrastructure, which heads up all of Rider, Driver, Eats, Jump, and the R&D side, which is ATG, the Advanced Technology Group, otherwise known as the Autonomous Driving Vehicle Group. We are looking forward to continuing to move people through 900 plus cities and delivering food in 500 plus more. So glad to be here.
Awesome. And before we get into it, I thought it'd be helpful to give a high-level overview of what your network-focused infrastructure looks like. Sort of architecturally, do you have a network? Do you use other people's networks? Do you do your own data center, cloud, and global footprint? And we can go in reverse order. Jason, if you want to start.
Sure. So something that we've communicated in the past is our tripod strategy, which leverages cloud and on-prem. So the way that we've developed it is to allow for a quick on-ramp through cloud providers and then off-ramp through our data centers located throughout the US. We've developed our data center fabric in a very simplistic model where we have multiple racks within a pod, multiple pods within a fabric, and then multiple fabrics within a zone. And then our zones are stretched across the US.
Awesome. And do you guys have a backbone, or are you disconnected as you interconnect with people?
We have a fully managed backbone where we leverage POPs to interconnect for our data centers and to on-ramp to the cloud.
Okay, cool. And Igor, I know you represent a number of different networks, but if you could give a high level of
Yeah. So at a high level, obviously, Yahoo was one of the super early, large scale data center build out people. And we've spoken at length at various forums like NANOG on what our data center architecture looks like. So I'm not going to repeat it again. Mm-hmm. But yes, we have managed data centers that are scaled out to hundreds of thousands of servers. We have a backbone that stretches the world that interconnects data centers, POPs for on-ramp. We have CDN POPs at the edge of the backbone that are connected and not connected to the backbone. Mm-hmm. And CDN POPs is where we have hundreds of terabits of capacity. Backbone is smaller than that, but still fairly large stretch of the world. So we kind of cover the gamut of networking, so to say.
And do you use much public cloud in production, or is it mostly data centers?
We definitely have a hybrid cloud strategy also. There's stuff that makes a lot more sense to have on-prem. There's stuff that makes sense to have off-prem. There's also, when you launch a new property, you don't know how well it's going to work out. So maybe it makes sense to do it quickly in the cloud. Then if it starts to scale and gains traction, then you pull it back into data center. We definitely utilize a hybrid approach.
Awesome. And Christian, there have been some changes in Akamai's infrastructure over the last few years.
That's true. We, after, I don't even know, like 22 years, decided to build a backbone as well. But actually, start with the other part. As one of the early CDNs, or as a CDN in general, what we always try to do is be as close as possible to the end user, right? So that is one of our big sales points. So to increase throughput by decreasing latency. So what we did is, and you refer to data center, own data center, third parties and stuff like that, we pretty much build everywhere. We have roughly 4,000 locations in 1,000 cities. So we either use what we call on-net, which is basically putting our own servers in an eyeball or in an access provider network. We add internet exchange points. We use a certain amount of transit to be connected. We use carrier neutral data center, as well as by now, actually, we have our own one. So the broad portfolio depending on what we need in a given geographic region.
That makes sense. And cool. So I guess the first question is, there's been a lot of shift in traffic pattern. There's been growth in some services. There's been some networks, in the educational world where there's been, less of certain kinds of traffic. I guess the first question is on the internet interconnectivity side. Curious what folks are seeing, and can start back again with you, Christian.
Sure. I think for us, the story is twofold, right? On one side, we, of course, use internet exchanges. And if you look a little bit in the media, LinkedIn, Twitter, you see that all the big internet exchanges basically publish their numbers on a daily, weekly basis and have one record after the other. So a lot of the traffic we have seen because of COVID-19 is going via the internet exchanges, and there is no doubt about that. Nevertheless, I believe that the bigger part of the traffic for the people who have an on-net solution, where we are just one of many, they're actually sending it directly. So you wouldn't even see it at an internet exchange. So I believe the growth, which we would see on an on-net solution, is actually even much bigger than what happens at an internet exchange.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And Igor?
So we definitely see traffic growth. I think Verizon actually published the numbers overall for Verizon wide, and the latest numbers show that web traffic is up like 29%. Verizon Media's are pretty closely mirroring that. As you can imagine, Yahoo News got pretty popular when this started. Also, gaming traffic is way up. In general, entertainment is up. The other thing that we see interesting is that we used to have a daytime peak and a nighttime peak. And now the nighttime peak has shifted into daytime. So as you would imagine, when people are at work, they were doing work mostly. When they go home, that's when they read entertainment and whatnot. And now they're home all the time. So it looks like they're doing both. So that's one interesting bit of traffic shifting pattern that we've noticed.
Cool. And Jason?
So for me, a little bit different. I'd say that, as we all know, one of our movements from Uber right now is move what matters. And also with shelter in place, we've seen a massive decrease in the amount of rider-driver activities going on. But we have seen on the opposite side of that, the eat side move up exponentially, which is great. So from the traffic shifting, I would say that we are just seeing it move versus change of balance, if you will. And since we leverage the cloud on the front end side, we're not seeing massive shifts in actual bandwidth utilization from one region to another. It's really coming in from the cloud. So well balanced for us.
Got it. Yeah, when we look across our service provider and content provider customers, we've definitely seen growth, and pretty fast growth over sort of the way I think about it is, a month or a couple months has become a week, but it's not like things are 5 times bigger than they were at the beginning of the year, and it's definitely depends on the kind of service and the kind of network that you're serving to. But there's been a lot of concern about, what does that mean for performance, especially of the broadband and wireless, which is all sort of merging, infrastructure, and of the, interconnection themselves. It sounds like, capacity-wise, there was capacity there, whether it was internet exchanges or infrastructure that was located in or near the premises of partner networks across the internet. But how have things been going in terms of performance and reliability of the access network, which is where people are sitting even more than they used to? And I'll let you guys, whoever feels the burning need, to go first. Or I can pick on someone, Igor, because you smiled first. Oh, okay. Christian.
I think in general, performance has been like on par. I mean, just to be clear, like we're not. Most CDNs and most large networks prepare for massive amount of traffic bursts. We prepare for Super Bowl type events. So mostly everything's been pretty good. There are definitely some eyeball networks that are having more challenges scaling fast enough than others. A lot has to do with logistics. We, for example, when we deploy into an exchange, we tend to wire up pretty much every available port up front as much as we can. And this way we can turn capacity up in a matter of just as soon as you throw a cross connect, we don't need to ship any equipment, everything is just online. Some of our peering partners are not set up that way. So when they see a need to upgrade, it's going to take them a little longer. And that's what I think everybody's kind of working through. But in general, things are just fine.
Christian, do you?
Yep. Let me actually throw a couple of numbers out, at least from our perspective, because the traffic shift or the increase was actually quite significant. So we published a couple of numbers in the last week. So the year-over-year traffic, when we compared like with March last year, we actually pretty much doubled the traffic. If we go back a month, then we have a traffic increase of approximately 30%. So what people are now doing at home and the change in situation for people, we clearly see that. When it comes to the utilization of the network, it is exactly as Igor said, right? There were a couple of sport events coming up, and what we usually say to our customers is that we have a lot of capacity. So if there are events or other things coming up, then we are able to handle it. So we usually provision quite a bit ahead. So if the traffic now grows faster, so far that was actually not a problem at all. What one can see is the question if the access networks can actually take it. For our experience so far, in most cases, the answer is still yes. Because when we provision capacity, we're not just building it on one side and then we don't care what the other side does, right? This is usually in conjunction with an access on eyeball provider. So from that perspective, in most cases, that wasn't a big problem.
Got it.
From my perspective, we've built our backbone to scale, and I would say that we are well provisioned to be able to handle whatever traffic we need to handle. But where we would see any issue would be from the mobile side, because obviously we're a mobile first company. People are pulling up their phones at their homes. Now, and this isn't statistical, but where I would probably see an issue, and this is based on my own experience, is if I'm on Wi-Fi and there's congestion from my ISP, then certainly I'm going to flip that off and go straight over to LTE, and I'll give a plug to Verizon in this case. They've been able to handle all of the traffic I've been throwing at them. So, it's kind of that balance of figuring out what works best for the eyeballs, whether it's going to be your home ISP or just hopping onto LTE to be able to handle it. But we've built our backbone and network to be able to withstand. So not seeing any change or challenge.
Got it. I've taken a fair number of questions from people that are really concerned about this that we were just talking about, which is the broadband and the wireless. And there are people out there doing tests against these. There's speed tests. There's sort of synthetic testing, and what we've seen is there are more, I call them micro outages, the burps that you get as you're growing and settling in and configuring things, but not the kind of multi-hour, half of a city or for a provider, sort of out type issues, and no, not the kind of chronic congestion. So for those of us that were using the internet in the 90s, which was everyone on this panel, sort of at our worst day, it's better than, West Orange, New Jersey was in the 90s. For packets. And I guess, is that roughly consistent with what you're seeing? There might be more transient things related to growth, but basically, again, the performance of these things seems to be fine for now. Great. So, we talked about the internet and the peering and a little bit of the relationship there. For those of you that use public cloud as part of your hybrid infrastructure, have you seen, any issues there getting capacity that you need or connectivity to or from the public cloud?
I could start on that one, and without calling anybody out in particular, I think.
Yeah, no shaming.
So we are rapidly scaling up 100 gig direct connects and direct peering to the cloud providers as quickly as we can. But I think where they're facing challenges on the logistics side, which we ourselves are facing, if they can't get the equipment fast enough to be able to support these 100 gig ports, then we're going to struggle slightly. Not to say that we have, but we are looking at different workarounds to be able to handle or balance the capacity. So the answer is yes, but it's not at a critical point to where we're struggling. It's just we're working through it with them to see how we can take on the additional traffic workloads that we need.
Got it. Igor?
My answer is much more boring than that. We haven't seen any. I mean, the internet was designed to, by most people, to be able to scale for these kinds of events, and the cloud was designed to scale for these kinds of events, and most of it just works as designed, which is really nice to hear.
Yeah, I've definitely gotten, I don't want to say that critique, but as I've talked with folks, most, media folks, or I should say press folks, the question is, well, where's the excitement? Where's the drama? What do we need to worry about? And we'll talk about that a little bit in terms of supply chain and what's coming and what we're thinking about to make sure we can continue to scale things. But, and again, we do see micro outages, but overall things seem to be, people do not seem to be freaking out, which is in a time when there's so much uncertainty. It's good that the work that we've done over the last decades has sort of, worked out. And I guess that's my next question is, for a lot of companies, 2006, when Amazon launched, was sort of the beginning of the popularization of stateless and cloud, the cloud way and cloud scale. For folks on this call have been working in what we now call web scalers who understood that you don't name servers one at a time and care about what they want to run. You just assassinate them if they don't want to run what you want them to run, and scale. But what kind of architectural things that you've had in place have made it possible for you to deal with the shifting traffic and scale? And one of the things that's of interest to network people, and particularly, is automation. And so I'd ask, with a particular focus on, the automation of scaling networks that work, at this terabit and larger scale that you guys are talking about. And so whoever would like to go first. Don't jump up and down.
I'll take it.
Okay, yes.
So yeah, I mean, we've been, I guess, one of the early pioneers to web scale, along with Google, Microsoft, etc., others. We definitely followed the ideology of servers are cattle; they're not pets. You don't try to name and carefully care for them. There might be a couple of exceptions to that, but as a general rule, that's how it is. So it made it really much easier to rebalance capacity when we need it and to what we need. Also, as you could imagine, running a large CDN or we definitely have automated systems that allow us to rebalance load, shift load around, route to the next closest place if we need to, while still keeping performance good for the end user. So designing for that was a major investment, and I'm really glad it's paying off. I think the other thing is, like, we talk about architecture, but some of it really comes down to logistics and how you design the logistic chain. For example, there's might be some companies that do just-in-time buying and just-in-time provisioning, and in a world where it's really hard to get into a data center and do that, or where supply chain might be experiencing issues, you're not going to be in a happy place. But if you've always been buying 3 months ahead at a minimum, then you probably have a large enough buffer to be able to absorb these kinds of things. I think also, at least we might have gotten a little lucky timing-wise. With Chinese New Year coming up, we're used to supply chain slowing down normally, just what happens all over the world. So we've kind of built a deeper buffer that we're now draining into, and we in general keep a very close eye on supply chain. I think we'll probably start talking about that in a little bit.
That'll be the next topic.
Yeah, let's just say that supply chain architecture is also as important as the architecture of your infrastructure, because they're super closely tied together.
That makes sense. Jason?
Yeah, I'm right there with Igor. I mimic everything he just stated. So it really does come down to building ahead of what you need versus that whole just-in-time thing. And since we're going to touch on logistics later, I'll leave that for last.
And Christian?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same, but let's see if I can add a couple of things or a slightly different angle. When we talk about the network component, every kind of automation and, for deployed servers, I think this is what we did since the beginning of Akamai in our case, where you just have a very good understanding of which cluster or which server is ready, which one not. And I never heard the kettle versus pet part, but I might use that in the future. And it's very much the same here, right? If one cluster or server fails, there's just another one taking over. And we know which one is the next best server, either latency or performance-wise, and then a user just gets sent to the next one. So there's not much specific part there, and that scales very well. So when the traffic increases, it just scales seamlessly so far. The more interesting part is probably when you want to scale quickly with network providers, right? Because then you got to talk to them. And we talked about that before. You need a certain amount of interconnections, and you have a provisioning process for 100 gigs left and right. And even if it is similar than what the others two have echoed, you pre-build, right? Because every provider has a different build cycle depending on how quick they are. They have a different finance cycle when they actually have money to buy new routers or when they have time to connect you. So since 20 years, we are constantly upgrading one or the other part. And you have, after a while, a pretty good idea how quick a partner is, and then you accommodate for that. But if at all, this is the part which is a little, which you can't really automate, or at least not to the same degree, where you then need a human intervention and just need a planning department going through that. But from a network perspective, shifting load between servers, clusters, if you do it at a certain scale and for a long time, then I think you just have that part under control.
So there is the dream that people have been talking about for 5 years of, the self-run, closed-loop automated networks reach out to each other and decide they want to peer, make some API calls, and all of a sudden they're peering with each other. That people are talking about. And we even see that we have customers asking, why can't you just, I see this here and that there, can't we just, agree? What was it called? Peer Maker at May East long ago. And of course, Megaport and Packet Fabric and PCCW. So is that the limit of automation, which is you have a decision is made, maybe surfaced by analytics, and then, but do you have any partners where you actually have it on your control to provision on their network, whether it's capacity or whether it's peering, or is it that human to human, the planning departments need to talk to each other? That's the boundary of automation today. Go for it.
I think the biggest problem usually is the underlying infrastructure, right? You still need a fiber, you still need someone connecting left and right. So if you have pre-provisioned to every potential partner enough, then sure, you can automate to a certain degree and just enable whatever peering sessions and ramp it up. But someone still has to put in a router, a fiber, and something like that. And as they cost money, you're not over-provisioning randomly. In that.
Yeah.
So I think this will be always the showstopper for making that completely seamless and automated.
Between networks especially, yeah.
And
Jason,
we've seen some...
Oh, go ahead, Igor.
Sorry. I mean, we've seen some interesting products. I mean, in the lab, we definitely use photonic switches to quickly pre-patch stuff and change things around. There's some interesting robotic patch panels that are coming in the market now, whether they're ready now or in 5 years. I think that things like that will definitely be able to speed up what Christian was talking about, the being able to run the fiber, because I think that's definitely the lone tent in the pole. Like the decision to upgrade, that has to be made by both parties, but once it's decided, we're still looking at 3, 4, 5, 7 days potentially trying to cross connect, depending how short staffed the facility is because of staffing levels, coronavirus, etc.
No one being in there.
Yeah. So I think robotics type stuff in the next X amount of years. I
was going to pick on Jason about that. Are you guys building data center robots or mind control helmets for knock techs in the ATG?
Not that I'm aware of, but that would be pretty cool. It'd be like, what is it, Emmett Brown's big old thing that he put on his head in Back to the Future. Haven't seen that yet.
Jay Parikh tried to entice me before Kentik, and he said, you could come work at Facebook and build data center robots and do all this automated. And I was like, that's okay. That's how we train the Utes, is by putting them to work. The job used to be tape ape, and then it was knock monkey, and then it was senior network engineer. So you guys have all touched on this a little bit, where it's actually part of your normal process to be thinking ahead in terms of logistics and provisioning and purchasing. And as you answer this so I guess that's the next question is, and we've had that question come in from a couple of members of the audience. One of them was, have any of you had trouble getting hardware in place, or remote hands, or problems in the network hardware supply chain? Another one was just generally equipment supply chain issues, or do you expect these to happen in the future? And I guess, if you could take that at the network and also the server level, and also describe how bespoke you are, because there's the, do you get off the shelf servers and, routers and switches, or are you, grinding your own in the basement, with soldering and chips? So, what are you seeing in the supply chain for, as you started to order and as you're talking to vendors about, into this year on those fronts? Jason, I'll pick on you.
Sure. I was going to see if anybody else was going to jump in. So I tend to have weekly calls down to the chip level to understand what their supply chain looks like. I am seeing that there are delays of a month to 2 months even in their manufacturing process, which is obviously going to spill over into the OEM switch market, and then further up the chain, or even sideways to that with the optics and the cabling. So anything coming out of Asia, I am seeing that there is a slowdown. So one of the things that we do, and I'm sure everybody else does here, is not put all your eggs in one basket. And we try to diversify across various vendors, and we place orders with both. And, whoever lands first works for us, because the way that we built our fabric is single SKU, so we remain agnostic to the vendor. And we just, rack and stack it, flip a switch, and then automation takes care of the rest. So I'm not saying that it's always that simple to where, we just place orders with everybody and he who lands first or she who lands first is the winner. But we do look across the entire supply chain to see where the holdups are and see if we can leverage other vendors in the process, or in the case now, I'm looking to onboard additional vendors in certain areas and see if that helps out with supply chain for ourselves more so than the vendors.
Got it. And just so people can understand, do you design your own servers and down to the chip level, or is it using shelf server side hardware?
So I have a parallel team, not my team, a peer of mine runs for all of our ODM switches, and it is designed all the way down to the chip level. So they are constantly working with multiple chips, multiple NICs, you name it. They have made a commoditized box to where it's a white box solution for them. We're also doing the same thing as we're looking ahead at doing a white box solution for switch. So that way we could be somewhat agnostic to the OEMs out there as well. Mm-hmm. And this will be something that'll help us out from the supply chain side and from a technology side, and being less ingrained with any one in particular vendor.
Okay, got it. Christian?
We do a couple of different things. And to answer the question of the gentleman, is there a problem or with the different sections of the problem? And the answer is yes, pretty much to all of them, just to different degrees. So whenever we have enough volume for either server switches or other parts, then, as big companies do, they start to build their own stuff. With servers, we do for a long time by now. And well, we take commodity chips, but then, the motherboard, the design of the servers, the specs and everything else is basically designed by us and then built by a system integrator. In the network area, we do both. We buy known brands, but for some parts, we also use white label silicon and then have an own operating system and stack on top of it. So depending on the volume, we basically do more ourselves. I think what we have seen in the last month is that supply chain is a quite interesting and complicated topic. Especially, as a particular part like a server, so consists out of a lot of different parts, which are not all coming from your system integrator or from China, because that particular one buys it and sources it all over the world as well. And depending on which country is at a particular time in lockdown, that has then an effect on a little screw or, whatever component is missing. So I guess we have, in that regard, also understood our supply chain better than before. We did various things. So to be honest, so far, it's not particularly bad, besides that we ended up in way more meetings and overhead to get it running. But we get servers, we get switches, they have a certain delay. We did different things from, stocking, talking to various vendors, various mitigation scenarios. So pretty much all what you can do. Either you build a bigger inventory in a part, you change vendor where that is possible or makes sense. Depending on, if it's a chip or an integrated part, then that is very difficult. If it is just something easy, then probably that's easier to move, or you live with a certain amount of delay. To be honest, if at all, I think it's now getting slowly better, especially now as China has opened up and people started to work again in the factories. We actually see less of it and have now a much better view of where we are going with the supply chain. But it's surprisingly complicated if suddenly, a little thing is missing out of your big server or so, and then you try to find it somewhere in the world.
Mm-hmm. And Igor, you've always been a vendor knowledge and torture specialist.
I mean, I guess we do all of the above. Some stuff we build ourselves, some stuff we spec ourselves, some stuff we buy off the shelf, buy both merchant solutions and custom silicon. I think in general, the supply timeframes have gone up. What used to take us 2 weeks to receive from time of order to the time we receive it now takes 4, 6, in some cases 16. Our answer to that is, I mean, we definitely see if we have alternatives and if they're easy to use, or we just extend our planning cycle. Like I started saying before, we always try to run about 3 months ahead of demand. Right now, we're planning 6 months ahead because with a 16-week delay in the planning cycle plus delay in deployment, that's just what you have to do. That doesn't mean that we have gear just sitting on the shelf willy-nilly, but it does mean that we have to plan much further ahead, so there's more overhead on us to do so. I think in general, some people have managed to stabilize their supply chain, so the delays aren't getting worse. Some people believe that supply chain might still get worse. So one of the problems that a lot of people are facing is that, so China closed, the rest of the world was still operating. But China, not only, like, there was stuff that's assembled in China, but there was also stuff that's manufactured in China, shipped to Malaysia, something was done to it in Malaysia, shipped back to China. As these, as the world, it's not every country closing at the same time, you could find yourself in a situation where the worst case scenario happens and the thing that you need the most gets delayed. And then that when they are reopened, the components that they needed to make the thing, now that's closed. So we're keeping a very careful eye on that to make sure that there isn't like a cascade issue. I think once all this is over, there's going to be definitely a lot of lessons learned in supply chain management, and a lot of us will be thinking about whether we need, I mean, we definitely need more visibility into supply chain, like Christian was saying, but also we might be thinking about shortening them because right now this is just a lot of dependencies that we're uncovering, especially in network components. It's like silicon phosphate mining. What's the delay between something getting mined to something actually becoming an optic? It's definitely becoming interesting.
Interesting. So it sounds like there's deep inspection, deep process inspection and supply inspection, but is anyone at the point where you started having either calm or fevered nightmare dreams about changing network architecture if you can't continue to, we have architectures which rely on tons of extra bandwidth essentially all over the place. QoS is quantity of service. But is anything at that level, or right now it's sort of more cautiously get ahead plan and make sure it doesn't get to that point where you have to think about changing architecture?
I mean, I think for us, we're even more bought into what we were doing, and to us, it's pretty clear that what we were doing works very well. So this is kind of proof of we did the right thing.
Okay.
I'm going to say the same thing. We are doing more of the same. Not to say that we aren't looking to re-architect for the future and growth, but it's agnostic to the situation that's going on. So we're slow and steady.
Got it. And someone was telling me that their backup plan is basically Bitcoin mining architecture of open racks in a cheap place, and don't worry about the fans and the screws, and just have the motherboard and the SSD, on a piece of plywood. You're not worried about the fans and the screws and the multi-country to that point today. Buying warehouses and hanging, like we used to hang modems up, by paper clips to stack them well. Okay. Awesome. So, supply chain is one element of an even larger topic, which is what happens if the world changes. And we're certainly in that right now, maybe more than we expected to be in early January, or even necessarily later January, early February. And so there's planning exercises that companies do, especially companies at your scale. We've even done them around business continuity and disaster recovery. And supply chain and thinking about this one element of it, how do humans work is another, especially if, either my servers or network or humans in one area are, affected differently. And none of us want to be in this situation, but on the other hand, I guess it is an interesting question, is what are we doing now that was contemplated in, people call them BCDR, business continuity and disaster recovery plans, and are there any things that you're starting to think about that when life returns to enough calm, we have time, that that we might start thinking about that are just different dimensions that we hadn't thought about before? And Igor, I'll pick on you.
Yeah, so I have a fairly interesting story about this, actually. So as you can imagine, we definitely had a BCDR plan. Our company's been around for quite a long time, so we've seen the SARS epidemic, we've seen H1N1, flu, we've seen MERS, we've been around for 9/11. So we definitely had a plan in place, and our plan covered a regional pandemic with failover capability into other regions to kind of shift load, just like we do with production. We also covered a worst case scenario where the entire globe is kind of pandemic, or not, but not a pandemic, just the entire globe is kind of shut down for a couple of days. I don't think any of us realistically looked at this 100-year event where the entire world shuts down at once for a prolonged period of time. So about 3 weeks before the reality of everybody has to work from home became reality, we started looking and examining our DR plans to see how well we would be able to handle it. And we saw that we needed to augment VPN capacity in a lot of places. So over a period of 2 weeks, we did. A very interesting thing that we started thinking about it was, so we're going to execute our DR plans, but this isn't a matter of staying in this mode for 3 days or 4 days. We're now going to be staying in this mode for 4, 6, 8, 12, who knows how many weeks. What's the DR plan now for the DR plan? Because for 3 days, you can kind of expect things to run normally. For a period of 12 weeks, well, random things will happen, equipment will fail. What do? We actually had to create a DR plan for the DR plan and a business continuity plan for the DR plan as well. So that was a very interesting learning exercise that I honestly, back in January, never thought would have to do. But the people who were involved, there was a lot of hard work, but we definitely stood up capacity ahead of the need. And now we've got 3 megabit all hands HD video call every day going on with our leadership. That's something else we never thought would happen. Like the average employee bandwidth utilization went up 6-fold because of this kind of stuff. We honestly never thought about that, but that's what you have to do to make sure people are calm and informed.
You do split tunnel? Did people get to Netflix through Corp or over the VPN, or do they do it direct?
We do not allow split tunneling.
Okay,
and we're scaled out for that.
Okay, so you're supporting their entire home network when they're working from their device.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Jason, would you like to go next, or Christian?
Sure, I can jump in. So I don't manage the corp infrastructure, but I do know that from both the what we'll call prime side, which is rider driver eats, and the ATG side, it was a quick race to the finish to scale up the bandwidth and reach out to the carriers for that. And then, of course, the infrastructure. I don't see that there was any I'll say any pitfalls that we had, because I, as an end user, have been running just fine, and my team has been working remotely without much of an issue. So it looks to me as though the Corp team did what they had to without much issue.
And what about just how does the world we're living in now reflect the BCDR plans that the exercises that you did before this to think about how do we need to operate in different or degraded situations?
So I think having the tripod strategy that I previously mentioned has really helped out to be able to shift workloads from on-prem to cloud, or to just spin them up in cloud if we're not able to build out fast enough in our data center. And building out fast in our data center is more about the logistics side than anything else, because our automation takes care of the build out fairly quickly. So having that ability to utilize cloud has made it a lot easier. So therefore, whatever we did in the past, which was to make this a reality, has helped us to get to where we are today and to maintain.
Cool. Christian?
I think when and this is more from a network and architecture side than from any, business continuity for the company itself, so that might be a little bit a different scope. But if you look at network and architecture components, I think what we usually have planned for in the past was that you have a geographic and usually relatively time-wise low impact on something, right? You have a nuclear disaster, you have a flooding, you have a riot, whatever the problem in a particular country is, or a country goes offline and shuts the internet connection down, stuff like that. And I think for that, we all have more or less, well, if the internet doesn't solve it itself, we have all various strategies to cope with it, right? You have another server cluster close by, or, you deliver the traffic from somewhere else, these kind of things. What made me think now is if you can't really rely on too many other clusters around, right? Especially if we take the length into account, usually a bigger outage or something like that is done in a couple of hours or whatever days. If we now have a situation which goes over weeks or months in some geographic areas in a worst case scenario, and you have less opportunity to actually make a big impact or change the situation, then what are your strategies then? What can you actually do? And I think this is something which we haven't really, at least I not taken into account to that degree, right? That wasn't really a business plan or a planning on a global pandemic, which might start either supply chain or, just any updates or data center access in particular regions for weeks or so.
Well, it sounds like that's a theme, which is, the BCDR plan has assumed temporal time or geography bounded issues that we're working around, where it's, maybe days or a week, not months at the high end, and, a region of the world, not the entire world. And, probably because of the time was a little bit less focused on the supply chain issues that we talked about. We don't think a year time frame for potential impact. And of course, we don't know exactly when life will return to semi-normal. We're all hopeful, but realistic and probably science-based. I'll avoid the political comments. At Kentik, we've been remote, and I think a lot of you have all of you have certainly been distributed, if not remote. But what's different, and Igor, you talked about this a little bit, and with split tunnel, which is a technology thing, we're basically not just work from home, we're work from family. And the next topic that I want to talk about is the people side of it, which is we've all got uncertainty. People have stress in their lives. They've got the kids at home and need to support them, and family first. So that's definitely a part of our BCDR. We always said, look, we don't need the office. We can work from anywhere. We use SaaS companies. We audit them, and we don't have a file cabinet full of stuff at our office as an 80-person SaaS company. We use other SaaS, Salesforce and and Bill.com and such. And we could constitute and go work at home, but what we hadn't really prepared for was this: how do we help support our groups, and then even our, people that we work with at our customers. And as managers, I guess we all think about this a lot. And I guess any tips or, things that you found that have worked really well supporting your teams through this time, or any new kind of work patterns that you've been able to establish to help both support and keep things running as they were.
I'll jump in.
Sure.
So, it's great to see that productivity has really gone up. It's funny to say that, but where I've seen an issue is more around the work-life balance. As silly as that sounds, people are having a problem with the separation of work and pleasure, if you will, however much pleasure you can have at home, right? For days on end. And although I'm seeing this increase, I'm worried about burnout, because not being able to, walk away from your kitchen or whatever space you've set up, or virtual space in many people's cases, is a challenge. So what I've set up, and I actually took this from my Yahoo days, was something as simple as water cooler chats in Slack, so that people can just blow off steam, talk about anything that's not work related. We have 15-minute stand-ups every other day, just coffee talk, if you will, just to understand what people are doing right, what's not working well, and just trying to see what we can do to support each other, so that we don't get to a point where everybody's like, all right, I've had enough. At this point, what am I going to do? I mean, even for myself, I have 2-year-old twins, and that is a challenge in itself on a daily basis without work from home. So now I inject that into my work life, and I'm quite happy to see that my son hasn't, come through the door. Although, we are all accepting of that now, the empathy from others has really helped out to make that less of a challenge. But I think we have to figure out how to get folks to understand when it's okay to walk away and not feel as though they're being a burden on their peers because they have to step away or to be late for a meeting. And these are all simple things that most of us probably think about, but nobody really voices on a day-to-day from the engineering side, because they don't know how to address it. So as a manager, I like to be the one to put it out there for them, so that way they feel that they can come back and have that two-way conversation. Igor or Christian, are you guys seeing the same thing?
I mean, we definitely, there's definitely interesting. So I'm somebody that's been working from home for almost 20 years now. And a lot of people that, a lot of my teammates have been working from home at least, several days a week at the very least. But it's definitely quite an adjustment. And I think something we all are very cognizant of, this isn't just working from home, this is working from home in the middle of a pandemic, which definitely adds a lot of stress to it. The things that, the obvious things that we always tell people is make sure, create a routines to make it easier. And remember, you're working from home, you're not living at work. So, don't forget to have lunch and to step away from the computer. And, family time is also important. Also, like Jason was mentioned, he took a lot of things from, he used to work with us. And having the water coolers of constant check-in, of making sure that everybody's okay. We're a pretty tight team. We very much take care of each other. And even as people will laugh, but you might have teammates that are running low on toilet paper that can't find toilet paper. So you go and see if you can find it for them and maybe ship it to them. We kind of on the lookout for each other. Oh, you're writing a Lysol. I just saw it on Amazon. I'll order it for you. Things like that. That just it's the little things that show that you care, that you're not just coworkers, you're teammates, you're friends. Really go a long way to helping people kind of adjust to this new abnormal, as they say now. And it's the little things that really matter.
It's a blend of your family and your extended family, which are the ones that you spend 8 to 10 hours a day with.
Yep. Yeah.
I found the comment about the burnout interesting, and I might have to think about that more. I haven't seen it from that perspective. So when the pandemic started, we made a statement, especially from a managerial perspective, right, that people first, not very different than most other companies. And I probably have half of my team, which is globally distributed, working remote anyway. So for most people, that wasn't a big change. Funny enough, which I now figured out, the people who are usually going to the office are the ones which have the most kids at home. which on the other side now I know most of them. So if you wanted to ever do a team building event where you meet the whole family and see how they live, couldn't have been any better. So one can see positive aspects out of that as well. We had different people doing just very different things, and I think we were very accommodating and tolerant so far. So we have seen people with kids who now take shifts, right? One parent take the early, the other one the late shift, and then they make a decision in which time zone they are now basically living. And it certainly blends in very well. There's no differentiation anymore, right, for these people working or family. And when you have a call, half of the family walks through or plays or, you know. But on the other side, I'm not sure if the work part, if they're stressed at all, if the work part was the part, or more, you know, balancing these different things at the same time. So I don't think there are exceptions, but I don't think that the majority of us was working now way more. It was just, you know, a constant stream on being online. One of the parts we did as well to, you know, see where people stand, how they feel, and replace the water cooler chat or the coffee break is hundreds of chats. You know, I think now I don't even know how many chats are, and someone is constantly writing something. So I'm not sure if that is actually the answer to our question, feeling connected, because now I put half of them on mute and hope that nobody writes anything which interrupts me. So if that becomes a long-term thing, I think we have to figure out how we actually focus on one part, but then still feel connected and have a balance between. But yeah, otherwise, different people feel very different about it, right? So it's more a character question. Some take it very cool, and some of them are very stressed or worried. And then, as usual, as a manager, you pick your person where they stand, and then.
Generally at Kentik, in one sense, it would be hard to see that we're working from pandemic from family. You know, things keep going. I do tend to worry, you know, about stress continuing to build and what we can continue to do to help. And, you know, let's say into May, you know, we don't want to try to call an end to, you know, the new normal or abnormal, as you said, Igor. You know, because there's definitely, I think, a lot of people, you know, there's yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And we do all push people, you know, to not be up at midnight and like the crazy people, you know, make sure you get some sleep. Don't watch the news at night. We tell people that. We set something up. It was called WFH Parenting for the half the company that has kids. Someone renamed it to WTF Parenting. And it's been a great, as you said, like release of all the craziness that people have from kids and kids at home and all that. So thanks, everybody. We do have a couple more questions. You know, one, the question is, Anna asks, when the pandemic abates, is there anything that we're doing that we're seeing now that makes you think about hiring? You know, any changes in terms of skills, whether they're networking or people skills or other shifts that you would think about with lessons learned from what we've been all been going through?
Is probably not so much for Christian or Igor, since they have very distributed teams, but maybe for more of a company like Uber, who is centric to various areas. Like my team is very centric to San Francisco. I have the Texas area, and then I guess Seattle. I think that the way it should be perceived moving forward, given that we're able to function in a work from home environment, is to realize that there is talent outside of these areas, and folks are able to function from outside of these, you know, zones. And we could, you know, really explore what the talent base looks like moving ahead, you know, globally versus, you know, in one region or another. So I'm looking forward to that.
Anybody else? All automation and coding was already important. Being able to keep your cool under pressure was already important. But I think a lot of people are thinking offices and what will happen. But
I mean, as somebody that's worked from home for a really long time, I'm super productive when I work from home. But if I don't see my teammates face to face every X amount of weeks become less productive. So I'm not sure if this is the proof that everybody should go work from home. It's definitely proof that we're all productive while working from home, but this is also not representative because we're working from home and some of my teammates working from home while babysitting, which I got to say, one of the really cool perks that my employer provides is if there is a babysitter who you trust enough in this pandemic to let into your home, they'll pay for it, which helps restore a couple of my coworkers' sanity, to put it mildly. But I don't know if this is like the ultimate proof that work from home works, but I mean, clearly it does. But I don't know if offices are threatened by this. From a personal perspective, I am very interested to see if the whole idea of open office space is going to go away as a result of this. So it's going to be interesting what happens.
I've seen that, suggested as a coming back from pandemic is we all socially distance to like 8 feet from each other, and then to protect each other from aerosol, start building walls and glass around ourselves, and then all of a sudden it's no longer an open office. That kind of transformation. One last question, if you guys have another minute or two, that William had asked. And I've heard this from other people, which is, this panel is web scale folks, and people ask, is the shift, are the changes that we're seeing gonna disfavor smaller players in the, let's say, service provider space, and make it so that this question specifically is regarding CapEx, that the smaller ISPs, have difficulty scaling. And I guess, are you seeing any difference in, broadband and wireless providers that you work with, based on size in terms of their ability to adapt, process or network growth wise? I mean, looks like it's, from looking across, Kentik's got dozens and dozens of smaller providers, and they seem to be going okay and, doing peering and expanding capacity like everybody else. And it sounds like no one else is having the issue there. So, I
mean, it's interesting because the smaller you are, the faster you tend to move. And the bigger you are, the more CapEx you have. So I think the two things kind of manage to balance itself out fairly well.
Cool.
Yeah.
And supply chain could be either more impactful or less impactful if you've already done your upgrade of your 5 devices for the 3 years. Then maybe you're more okay.
It depends on so many factors. I wouldn't see the big versus the small one being one here.
Okay.
Whatever speed where you stand in your upgrade cycle. If your business were basically working before and you were making money, then it should work afterwards exactly in the same way, regardless if you're big or small. So,
well, thank you everybody, and really appreciate taking the time and talking through what's going on. It'll be interesting to see how we all feel a few months later. Hopefully, we'll all be gaily skipping down the street, but that also might not be. And best of luck on your supply chains. May your supply chains be healthy, and your ability to get in and work with your infrastructure be open and free.
And well, thank you, Avi, very much for hosting us.
Absolutely.
A lot of fun. So thank you.
Yep.
Thanks for the invite.
And thanks for all the attendees and questions.
If there are additional questions or you'd like more information after this, you can find us at kentik.com or email us at info@kentik.com. The recording of today's presentation will be available following our event, so please look for an email from the Kentik team to rewatch and share the presentation. Have a nice day, everyone, and thank you again.